Hey, are you hiring? If you answered yes, let XenTegra Staffing help staff your IT people needs. Head over to XenTegra.com/XenTegra Staffing to find out more. XenTegra Staffing, we can staff your IT people needs. Welcome to another edition of the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton, your source for all things Citrix.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 44 of the Citrix Session podcast. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. This was a special edition. We're kind of jumping out of our normal Monday routine, and we're hosting a special podcast here with Calvin Chu. Calvin is the Vice President of Product at Citrix, marketing desktops and apps specifically. Calvin,
actually, it's going great. Thanks for reminding me, though. I need to update my profile there. I'm actually now in product management for the cloud platform. So thanks for that. I'll have to go fix my online profile.
Yeah, sorry about that. We should have talked about it beforehand, but I guess better to find it than not.
Yeah, no worries. It's good to know. It's like one of those things like that changes, and you got to go. Like when you change your address, right? You got all these different places that you put it out there. And you got to go figure it out.
It's a great conversation starter around identity management, right? All these years, you had your identity all over the place, and now that's getting better. But still, there's the the profile and the description that goes along with that. Plus, your identity's all over the place. Just keeping up with that it's impossible, to be quite honest. But we've got it.
Yep, for sure.
Speaking of identity management, that's one thing that cloud services is good at, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Keep it all in one place out there. Although it just remembering the one place to get to them is also the challenge.
So I think your move into the services side of Citrix's business specifically is a great indicator of where Citrix is at in terms of wanting to invest more of their top resources on that side of the business going forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of this is certainly in just looking at all the transition that our customers are going through and the things that we're trying to help them through, right? And going from their on-prem implementations to the cloud services. And so, you'll probably see across the board a number of the old timers like myself kind of bring in what we know about the traditional Citrix use cases, why they went with us in the first place, trying to understand, their cloud journeys and how we can build out our cloud products to kind of help them get there and how things have changed. Most recently, after kind of being maybe a little bit down the IT priority list, VDI seems to have certainly this year come roaring back into the spotlight.
Yeah, I love that conversation because I've never stopped talking about specifically virtual apps and virtual desktops, but VDI is certainly one way to do that and probably the most common way to refer to it. The pandemic is horrible for the world, horrible for the country, horrible for people, but it falls right in line with what I personally, and I'm sure you have been telling people for years we had to get prepared for. And it's not necessarily a pandemic; it's the idea that your kid's going to be sick, or it's going to be a snow day, or the train you normally take to work breaks down. I mean, all that stuff applies.
Yeah. Disruption in general. And by the way, I like that you're a stickler for, yes, VDI is one particular architecture. Virtual apps and desktops is a broader category. There's, lots of different ways and people kind of shorthanded in different ways. But I like that you're precise about the language that you use. I know that about you in general. But to your point, I think, it's not like in the past few years, say 5 years, that people have been doing something other than VDI or virtual apps and virtual desktops. It's just that, they haven't been talking about it as much, or they haven't been saying, oh, yeah, hey, this is, number one for the company. We've got to figure this out. They're still doing it. They were just kind of trucking along. It works. And then now all of a sudden they've got a use case for it and an increased demand for it and just right back up into the headlines,
Well, and I think that ties in really well with what we're going to talk about here, which is a blog you wrote recently around the title of it's Bringing Desktops as a Service to Citrix Virtual App and Desktop service, I think probably might have been the right word in that.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe you tell me if I'm wrong, but the whole concept here is enablement of that desktop and app workload virtually, but as a service, which most people refer to the marketing gimmick of cloud, which is okay, cloud, but making sure that people know that at least the platform, and now even in this conversation, the workload itself being able to be delivered as a service becomes easier and easier and easier from a procurement perspective as well as a deployment perspective. And that's really what you cover in this blog, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, probably more so than a lot of the announcements we've been making recently, or I'd say as much so as a lot of the announcements we've been making, this move and the things that we're going to talk about here is really a direct response to what's been happening with the pandemic and customer feedback. And and I think I'm proud of Citrix and our nimbleness here and kind of looking at what we thought was a product strategy, recognizing that there's a new set of needs and opportunities ahead of us and kind of shifting them over within the span of a few months. Because really, when we first launched Citrix Managed Desktops, and last year was, really the beginning of that, I think it's safe to say we kind of envisioned a different set of use cases, a different go-to-market, and maybe, would help us with some smaller customers and, folks that were looking for just something simpler and easier because they didn't need all the enterprise capabilities. And I think that's still true. But what we saw in March and in talking to a lot of our customers, no matter what size they were, it was, hey, this capability would be great to have as part of my product, right? Or as part of my existing entitlement in CVAD, as we affectionately call it, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, even in with the Premium Edition, or if I'm a Workspace Premium Plus customer and I have that entitlement, all of a sudden I have a burst need or an elasticity requirement that I didn't know I was going to need. And particularly, you think about March, April, we didn't know that we'd still be here in September. Trying to deliver virtual desktops and still grow it and meet increasing demands for it.
Right.
So as we kind of looked at that strategy, we said, hey, you know what? Actually, while this technology and this service has been great for kind of expanding, the types of customers we can reach, we have a ton of existing customers that are really interested in being able to leverage this and be able to help use this to increase their agility. So why not just make it a full-fledged member of the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop service portfolio, and not only add it to the portfolio, but take the capabilities that are in it and make it part and parcel of every edition inside there.
Right. It makes sense for the customer, and also makes sense for Citrix because you just get stickier and stickier as the adoption climbs.
Yeah, I think, when you look at it, we're really the only solution that then offers something completely from a full, enterprise capability of virtual apps and desktops to a managed capacity, managed desktop as a service kind of offering all in one license type, right? So that kind of flexibility out there is, I think is a pretty nifty move.
Yeah. All right. Well, based on that conversation, I think we covered the intro pretty well and more. And then we also covered this, but let's make sure we hit it firmly. So one of the things you guys are announcing here in this blog is that Citrix Managed Desktops, the ability to provide a DaaS service, either using Citrix's tenant in Azure or using the client's tenant in Azure, is part of the virtual app and desktop service. And maybe it's just you explain to me which edition it falls into, but it's part of what you get. You don't have to go out and buy another service to get Citrix Managed Desktop anymore, right?
Yeah. So that in essence, that is correct. I'll say the way we're executing it is in a couple of phases. So the first foot just dropped in that we created a new edition, if you will, in the portfolio of this Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops Standard, right? So think of Standard as the edition name, and the official name being Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Standard for Azure. In case you're want to make sure you got the exact title correct.
Well, and so just for Azure desktop workloads, right?
Correct. Yeah. The capacity it runs, it only provisions into Azure. So the standard edition that is.
Can I throw a curveball on that one real quick?
Sure.
So one of the benefits of running your desktop workloads in Azure as part of, just desktops in Azure or part of a Citrix solution is multi-session Windows 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does Azure Stack HCI play into that? So I'm running Azure, but I'm bringing it back into the edge with a Azure HCI solution, hyperconverged solution. Do you know?
That question has come up. I think we don't expect it to be hugely different from a workload standpoint. I'm not entirely clear myself, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't think Microsoft has actually made a statement yet on the licensing entitlements for the on-prem Azure stack. Unless you've heard of something, to my memory, I can't remember them saying something.
Well, I've heard lots of things from lots of different people. And I've heard no one from Microsoft officially give me an answer one way or the other. I've got some things waiting in the wings depending on that answer, but I thought I would take the chance to put you on the spot. So sorry.
No. That's totally fair. I know that we have asked the question ourselves, and so that's why I said, as the last time I remember asking it ourselves, we have not heard an official policy statement on that.
So for this announcement, this is where Citrix Managed Desktop, your tenant Citrix's or the customer's tenant in Azure, both in Azure, becomes part of this product called Citrix Desktop Standard, and so is that limited to? And I'm actually a big fan. I've never sold it, never implemented it, of Citrix Virtual Desktop Standard or Virtual App Standard. But so it sounds like that has come a step forward, and now Citrix Managed Desktop is basically, at least the Azure version, is now called Citrix Virtual App and Desktop Standard for Azure, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we never had a apps and desktops standard edition, right? We had a virtual desktop standard, which basically only did fully hosted client OS type of VDI, but not one that could actually do both the apps and the desktops capability, and certainly not one with managed capacity in the back end.
Well, let's talk about this next session here.
Yeah, so we
Well, I want to say something real quick. Gabe Correjo, who's the product manager, I believe, for this remote. Gabe got that job, I don't know, 8+ years ago now. I love that solution. And I was talking about it. Gabe was talking about it before it ever was officially a product. So just a real quick recap for people who don't know, the ability to use a Citrix license, a Citrix session to connect back to your physical computer, probably at your desk, but could be sitting in a lab somewhere. That's Citrix Remote PC, and is a awesome way to reutilize the hardware that you already have provisioned and paid for and sitting at your desk with a high fidelity solution. You want to cover what you're covering here in this section?
I love, by the way, that you mentioned Gabe. And I'm going to give Gabe a shout out too, because he has been a tireless champion for this technology and for this solution. And I think in a lot of ways, in March, its day had come or has come. But we saw a ton of customers going through with a challenge of, okay, I need to provide people remote access, but I can't procure servers fast enough, or I'm not ready to set up in the cloud yet. I haven't laid that groundwork. And so this went from basically, being just kind of a corner use case, at least from our telemetry that we could tell. People would use it, but they kind of use it and turn it on and off again, to where, it has actually become a major use case that we can see across our customers during the pandemic. And so people connecting into their physical PCs that are still sitting in those empty offices. It is their PC experience. It is their desktop as they left it. What we realized, this is another sort of pandemic reaction from Citrix in the product line, was that people wanted to use it, that they maybe wanted a more affordable license package to get access to this capability. And on top of that, particularly in a situation like this, they want to be able to use a cloud broker to get there, right? And to set it up that way without having to go through and set up all the stuff on-prem, and particularly if they weren't prepared for the situation. So what we did was we actually brought remote PC access capability into this managed DAS server. So you've got the broker in the cloud, you've got access then to PCs in your office or under the desk, wherever they may be, and you have an easier to deploy and a more cost-effective way of getting that license entitlement all in one move there.
So this is actually it is the product we've been talking about all along, and we made the statement, okay, it has to be in Azure, but this is the one nuance, I guess, where it doesn't have to be in Azure. It can be a physical device sitting, somewhere on your network.
Yeah. This will be the one exception. Of course, the rest of the infrastructure and all that is in Azure, as all of our virtual apps, desktop services are. But yeah, the workload actually runs in that one piece on-prem.
Yeah, I do want to call out, two things. One, for the people who don't quite get what we're talking about here, this is if you would be using go to my PC or log me in or something to remotely access your physical desktop. This is a much higher fidelity user experience way to get that done. And it also lays the groundwork for desktop virtualization in the future.
Yep, exactly. And you get security policies, the HDX, all that along with it.
There is the one section out here where it talks about the Windows Server. How does that tie into what we're talking about here? The physical servers?
I just saying that you have that flexibility, like the OS, you can connect to whatever, right? So the primary use case is going to be your desktop OSs, your client OSs, Windows 10, Windows 7.
Right. Okay, well, let's talk about the fun part, always fun part. How do you license this thing?
Yeah, so one of the other pieces that we heard that was missing from the prior Citrix managed desktops, and something we started bringing back, if you will, into CVAD is the concurrent licensing model. And in general, as many of our cloud vendor compatriots will tell you, we try to move to some sort of user licensing in particular, because that gives us a better ability to understand our direct COGS and our value that we're bringing to your organization. But there are certainly use cases where customers just don't know and can't really afford to manage every single connection that's coming in, right? Some cases it's easy. They know exactly what the user population is and everyone's getting a desktop. And in other cases it is, let's see, we have an example of one customer who's basically operating like an ISV. They've got a mission critical kind of Flash app that they need to run and distribute to 6,000 or more non-employees, right? So they don't know who it is. They don't have an Active Directory record for all these folks, and so they need a way of just saying, hey, if there's up to 6,000 sessions, it's fine. We're within our license bounds, and so those types of use cases, we're bringing the concurrent licensing model into this particular edition of the portfolio as well, which we had already brought it back for other CVAD versions, but this one's getting it as well.
Yeah. For the most part, you think a user license is going to make sense, but you get this case like you were just talking about. Higher ed, they've got a lot of students coming and going. It makes a lot of sense to have that as an option, and it makes the licensing technically more challenging. But you guys have solved it. That's great.
Yeah, it is definitely a technical challenge, and just being able to provide the right visibility is a challenge as well. But I think people really, really do provide or see a lot of value in that. While we're on the subject of licensing, I do listen to your podcast. So I was listening to the last one around. I think there were some questions about do we do user device licensing in the cloud, and how does that work? Mm-hmm. There's actually, I think I want to say it's Adam Lotz who did a blog on this recently, a little while ago, kind of diving into all the cloud licensing models. And it is a little bit different how we do it from on-prem, but basically it is an algorithm that goes into user or device licensing. And we kind of track both, and then we pick the most optimum for the customer. um, count, right? So if it's more advantageous to have had the device licensing, then it chooses the device licensing. If it would be better for user, it goes user.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to hear. I kind of just automatically assumed it was going to be too hard to do user/device dynamic licensing. I just put everything in the user bucket and said that's how we're going forward. But it sounds like you guys have invested the effort into being able to be smarter about it and honestly helping customers out by giving them an algorithm that does what's right and best for them versus just making everything a user license.
Yep, exactly. You got it.
Yeah, I do have a request for you. Do you remember the video of the presentation that used to be on Citrix TV, where the person who ran licensing at Citrix went through user device licensing and how the algorithm works when it first came out? Do you remember that video?
Oh, yeah. Who was that? I know what you're talking about.
I don't know, but I need that video. I mean, I try to explain to people and I do the best I can, but that thing was awesome. And then Citrix TV got moved onto YouTube and that video disappeared somewhere and all that. And I really want that video back.
Yeah, I guarantee you we'd have to reshoot it because I think we've modified how many of those things work. But yeah. Maybe
I would love another, like, well, with your blog, Adam, and maybe just the blog's good enough. You can point me to that blog. I think I might have found it a minute ago, but I'll get Adam on and maybe put him on the spot. Maybe.
Yep, you had to do a lot of good research for that blog. There was actually some nuances to how it worked and stuff like that were very educational for us internally. I'll admit.
It's almost one of those things I don't want to do a podcast on and explain to people because I mean I literally come off looking like I'm a smart Citrix guy just because I can explain how licensing works. Right. And everybody in the room is kind of dumbfounded and I'm like, oh, I just read the blog or I just watched the video, but that's okay.
Yeah. Just hide that blog. Just only send it to Andy.
Yeah. All right. Next section here is entitled Simplified Transition Path to the Cloud. What are you covering here?
Really just that we're making it so people who have on-prem versions or virtual app standard or virtual desktop standard, that they have a transition path. They have a way of sort of recognizing their loyalty and their customership, if you will, and leveraging that into a transition to take advantage of this new virtual apps and desktop standard service. Yeah. So in the lingo, there is a transition trade up path to CVAD standard.
Yeah, kind of like, and I'm going to go political here for a second, but the Al Gore's internet superhighway. I don't think he meant for it to be this, but basically creating a highway that helps us get in and get going, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, that may not have been totally cool, but that's what came to my mind. And like I said on the beginning of the podcast, it's just real time.
Well, remember back in the day when we thought that was a controversial statement?
Yeah. Oh man,
it seems relatively tame now. So
yeah, that's nothing. All right, so. This next section, desktop as a service, coming to other virtual app and desktops. I'll throw in the word service products. If that's not accurate, you're going to make the on-prem products do this, tell me. But I have to assume, and I read further along too and saw the word.
You're right.
I have to be very clear when I talk about Citrix and a couple other products, and Nutanix is one. I have to make sure I put the entire name of something in there because I don't know if you know Nutanix very well, but people call like 10 different things Acropolis and they call 5 different things Prism, and they never put the last piece that clearly identifies what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I just watch people's eyes glaze over because they can't figure out what they're talking about. If you add that little word, like in this case, service, it all makes sense. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Actually, that's good catch. That heading is coming to the other services in that portfolio. I think we actually kind of covered this earlier, but just to restate it. So not only did we add an addition to the service lineup with the CVAD standard for Azure, but we're also taking that simplified UI that's in there, the ability to manage capacity out of a Citrix tenant and sort of one-stop shop, turnkey DAS capability. We're incorporating that and just making that part of the core capabilities of CVAD in general first, whether you're getting advanced or premium or you're getting Workspace Premium Plus. So it'll all be in there. So no matter which edition you have, if you have a use case that, maybe it's just I don't know, we think of like you acquire a company or you've got all of a sudden a developer shop you want to stand up and for whatever reason, either you run out of capacity under your own contract or you don't have a contract with Microsoft already and you just want to acquire it easily in one turnkey motion from Citrix, we give you that capability.
Yeah, I like to talk about that in the terms of software, money. Anything's possible. If you buy another company that has a different edition, I'm sure between Citrix and your partner, they can find a way to get you a path to the next thing up in the stack.
Yeah, well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. All right. So my daughter and my son, I have twins. They're in the middle of applying to, I swear it's 10 different colleges they're writing essays for. It's just a massive part of my home life. But in one of her essays last night, she was pointing out that you have to, say something about the school and then you have to back it up with a fact. And I think that's what you're doing here at the very end of this. You're saying that customers are embracing desktop as a service, and then you're using a couple quotes from customers to prove that that's true. You want to cover this section?
Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that we've, like I said at the beginning, right? Like some of this is in direct customer response, customer reaction. And so, having had experience with Citrix managed desktops, its own product line for a little while, and making these changes based on what we've seen customers have wanted to be able to do, and that they want to integrate this in with their other licenses they've got from Citrix, or they've just got these types of use cases. So Lucid Technologies here was kind enough to kind of speak on our behalf and share their experience with being able to leverage a DAS-like service for their emergency response. I think they had originally thought like this is a way to enable us to be remote in the case of some other type of disruption, whether it's it says here fire, flood, I don't know, depending on where you are, a blizzard, right? Just having that kind of flexibility to work remotely when needed. And then all of a sudden it just became remote work all the time. Yeah. And so, it was a terrific story. We're proud to be a part of their solution there for their employees.
So I have two stories that are similar, right? So, one, I had a client who just moved to Citrix Virtual App and Desktop Service a month or two ago. And in the process of doing so, they stopped and said, okay, XenTegra, what are you doing different during the pandemic? And I was able to honestly answer nothing. I mean, we've worked this way all along. I'm using a Neverware Chrome device right now. And when I go home, I have 10 clients in my office. We use the remote technology all the time, so we didn't have to change anything, and I could honestly say that. The other is I was right before the pandemic hit. I was in Manhattan, and I was in the World Trade area, and a CIO and I were meeting, and then a COO walked in and said, hey, I got to get prepared for this thing. This is the day before the pandemic thing started in New York City. And I'm looking out the window, and I'm staring at the World Trade Center area, and I'm like, I can see the PATH trains. I've known those to break down. I mean, there's lots of reasons why we didn't have to wait on this. But if this is the thing that gets people thinking this way, then so be it.
Yep. Yeah. I got some other personal encounters as well on similar to yours, right? So just the other week, I was part of a CIO roundtable and just people discussing, what are their plans? How did they get disrupted so far this year? What are they planning to do for the rest of the year? And everyone was kind of going through, and it was a mixture. A couple of Citrix customers in there, some that were not. And there was one guy that was just being kind of quiet the whole time. And I said, hey, do you mind sharing what your plans were? And I did not realize this at the time, but he was a Citrix customer. And he said, really, this is not been that big a deal for us. We had the Citrix infrastructure in place. Everyone was getting, either a published desktop or a VDI desktop already. And about the only thing that changed was we had to create some, work from home kits for people, give them a monitor, give them a keyboard or machine that they could take home. But otherwise they were pretty pretty set, and they just smoothly transitioned into that. And it was really other pieces of the experience, the telephony and things like that they had to figure out. But for the most part, people were able to transition into a remote environment really quickly. And I think the other thing that I heard from I've heard from a lot of customers, and this is not necessarily Citrix specific, but kind of related in a way. But one of the things that I've been really interested to hear is just how quickly these projects have moved along, right? Like you alluded to that in your conversation with the customers. I've seen that people have taken projects that they thought were going to take 18 months, and they did them in the space of 2 weeks.
Right.
And they learned that they could cut through a whole bunch of bureaucracy and red tape and all the when customers saying like, we would test everything to death before we would roll it out to even a small team. And we realized, that wasn't really necessary. And users are actually a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. And so they were able to roll it out when they needed to and fix problems as they went along. And a lot of IT shops and a lot of IT partners for those customers have gained an incredible amount of credibility and goodwill. And I'd say almost like political capital in the last few months, and just how quickly they were able to make things happen for their businesses. And so now they're just trying to plan, where do we go from here?
I laugh when you say that, because I'm often talking to IT shops about, how often do you get, thank yous for how good you're doing for them. Mostly you just get hate mail. It's kind of like being in the restaurant business, which I used to think I want to be in. You don't get a lot of thank yous. You get a whole lot of complaining, even though that without you, they couldn't get it done. And this is given an opportunity for people to be thankful. All right, Calvin, I appreciate you joining, and keep us posted on other blogs. I'll keep an eye out, and next time you want to talk, we're a forum for you guys to get the word out to lots of different people.
Yeah, Andy, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation as well. It's been fun.
Yeah, we love, we do this because we like to learn, and we like to talk about it, and we like to share. And this podcast series it's just perfect for that. All right, Calvin, thank you. Anything else, I guess, maybe before I let you go, anything else top of mind that you have an audience of 10 or 10,000 you'd want them to know? Yeah,
I mean, we're pouring our all into these cloud services. As we've been talking about, the adoption has been, and the interest and people trying to move to it is been fantastic. We've come across a lot of folks that have said, "Hey, I'm glad I made the move. I'm well positioned to expand, or I wish I'd made the move. I'm not well positioned to expand, so let me help get set up." So that's where all of our attention's been lately, is just in helping with that transition into cloud and doing everything we can. So just keep looking. Watch for that space. I think it'd also be remiss if I didn't say, hey, we got these Citrix Digital Summit events coming up here in October. So if you go to citrix.com/digital-summits, I'm sure it's on the homepage as well. It's free to register. There's you'll see more announcements coming through there. Maybe we can have a podcast post each one of those. There's a series of 3 of them. Kind of talk through some more of the announcements. As well as, there's going to be like learning centers and new documentation and presentations and things like that. We didn't get to have a synergy this year. Not that this is a replacement for that directly or that experience, but it is a place to catch up on your Citrix news and latest best practices and stuff.
Yeah, not having the conferences is probably the biggest disappointment. One, I had another company I was going to launch that's all about edge and hyper-converged computing. That's why I was asking Azure Stack conversation a while ago. The other is just the amount of people we interact with and get to see in the 4 or 5 conferences I go to every year. Just a big part of the social part of this IT world that we live in, and miss that. But we'll get back to it next year, I hope.
Yeah, okay. I hope so. Cool.
Oh, I did want to ask you something real quick. So I've got a podcast later today to talk about WVD. If you have a peer on the Microsoft side and you guys would like to come together in a podcast that bridges between the two and have that conversation, let me know and we can have that one.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be cool. Just recently, we're I think Cam and I, in separate sections, were both part of an Agile EMEA virtual event, and so that's probably the most direct counterpart that would make sense. But yeah, we can figure that out.
I mean, if you really know these solutions well enough, this whole conversation we had around Citrix Managed Desktop and multi-session Windows 10, we really did talk about WVD or a subset of it, the part that really matters in this blog here, in this podcast. We just didn't stop to call it out.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And then, as a matter of fact, WVD was one of the specific targets for the original Citrix Managed Desktops. Was okay, you've got the multi-session capabilities. What is the fastest, easiest, best experience way that we can help take advantage of that WVD entitlement? Right. So that's how it was designed, and now it's part of the entire product line.
Right. Yeah, you're just a way to make it more enterprise worthy, and I call that scars on your knuckles. I actually did some automotive work this weekend. I've got my hands are all beat up, literally. Citrix has got a lot of years of getting punched in the eye over things that needed to evolve, and you guys have that, and Microsoft is truly trying to catch up and working really hard to do so. But we'll have a really hard time making up 30 years of growth.
And we're really working hard to keep raising the bar ahead of that. So, it's not like the use cases are getting any simpler.
And that's one thing to remind people of too. It only takes one feature that they need that will cause a whole project to fail. And that's where, Citrix comes into play in a WVD world.
Yeah. I was actually, when you say that, I was just thinking about, I don't remember what year this was, but I think it was like one of the very first times I met you, Andy, and it was outside of some Citrix event, and you just caught me in the parking lot and we were chatting. And even back then we were talking about sort of, yeah. You look over your shoulder at the parking lot of, it's usually Andy coming after you. Yeah. We were talking about how at the time, it was Microsoft. They even stated in their documentation for I guess they called it RDS terminal services at the time. They didn't really do any testing above 500 users, right? And we were kind of talking through, for the small users or SMB, there's a what's the simplicity benchmark or high water line, and I think that the net of that discussion was that. That simplicity doesn't come in the size of your company. It doesn't come in, the number of apps. It comes in, it can be defined by just by the experience of one simple thing, like you're just saying, right? It could be just one feature that makes the experience difficult, and that's complex. Right. And so there is no sort of one definition of what's simple enough or too simple.
And that's not IT guy experience. It's end user experience. And sometimes that can be the most trivial thing, but that's what they get stuck on. It's like the restaurant conversation a while ago. You see a fly on the salad bar one time, that restaurant is no longer a great restaurant and will never be.
Right. Yep. It's all over Yelp and then it's done.
Yep. That's right. All right, sir. Thank you for the time. I appreciate you joining today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you for listening to the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton. A special thanks to our guest for attending today's podcast produced by Pete Downing. For any input, or if you'd like to be a part of our podcast, please email us at info@XenTegra.com. Please head over to XenTegra.com/podcast to listen to all podcasts in this series. This podcast is copyrighted by XenTegra LLC.